All right, so let's begin by drawing a ramp, and I think that's going to kind of pump you up in a sense because it's not as complex as, say, drawing some of the characters for the table art design or whatever. It's a kind of a step-by-step process, and I think anybody can do this. So we're going to be using the stroke tool mostly for our ramp, and or I should say line tool over here. You'll notice that if you do click on the line tool, they kind of begin referring to it as a stroke right away over on this side, fill and stroke. And probably 10 is about right. Yeah, that looks good to me. You do have plenty of other options inside of here in terms of well, what do they call this? I don't know if I'd consider that the scaling of it. The width of it. You do some fun things now in the later versions of Flash/Animate, where you'll notice it kind of automatically tapers itself out over there. I'm going to disable that. It should be by default anyway, but let's just get back and use a nice solid line. And let's begin by just doing kind of a straight line up and down over here. This might not necessarily be where the ramp is on the table, but we'll begin with just something to work off of right over there, and then let's kind of angle it down over this way, so maybe it drops down into one of the lanes for the flippers, and then we'll do a kind of a nice curve over here up at the top of it, and that should just be enough to teach you guys. All right, so again, I've got just this line over here. It's on a layer on its own. I'm going to lock up everything else that was included in this starting file, so I don't accidentally mess with anything. And here's the snap tool over here. If you guys started with the last video, you noticed I tend to turn that on and off. So it is a nice option if you're going to be connecting lines together. So for example, these two are now snapped together, and if I were to kind of move this line, you can see that it is moving that one over there. This might not be the best way to make a very, I don't want to say strict, but a perfect corner up here at the top, although I'm not doing a bad job at it. It's almost about exactly what I would like, okay? But there is another way you could do this. So, okay, I got two straight lines over here, and I got a nice little curve in between them. Option 2 would be to go over here and start with the rectangle tool and just mostly use it for the stroke. So we're going to get rid of the fill ultimately. And when you do this, set the corner radius up. So let's try something like 60 initially, and you can see that at least for a document this size, that's nowhere near enough. So let's bump it up to maybe 250. I kind of forgot I was working in a really large well, it's not that large of a document. It's just that it's sized about right for the scene sizes in the Pinball starter kit, which is about 1080 by 1920. Okay, this was maybe a little bit more of what I was thinking, so I'm going to go and just delete that off. Let's get rid of the fill inside of there, and then get rid of some of the shapes that we're not going to use, or parts that we're not going to use. So there it is. I don't know which. You tell me which one looked better. Okay, so there's a couple ways we could extend this. Just draw another line over here and connect them up using the snap tool. You could also just copy a little section of it and then begin pasting it in place again. So if you go over here to your hotkey or use the hotkey for copy, or go the slowest way possible, go over here to copy. But you'll notice that you do have a paste in place option, and that's just holding down the shift key with that little, whatever that symbol's called, Command and V, and then of course on the PC, just do whatever you're seeing for those hotkeys as well. And so you can just do like little chunks at a time, get that a little bit longer. Or you know what, you could have also just pulled down on it and held down on the shift key, and that kind of snaps it down. That probably would have been the easier one, but I'd say get used to using that paste in place. And now what we need to do is run a line kind of parallel to this, but to go back and start with that, the same tool that we had before, you'll notice, we can get close, but I don't know, this doesn't feel just right over here. So try knocking this down to maybe 200. Let's see what happens then. And it could take a few tries to get it just right. think that's a little bit better. Maybe move it down just a little bit. Okay, so let's try it out. Of course, nice thing is if we do get it, the two rails here looking good and parallel to each other, we could do that, where we could at least kind of save the state of this to use it later. So, for example, I could hit F8 now and just say, nice curve, right? And then it's in the library under that, and then I might just go and break this back apart. So I'm back down to just editing the raw strokes again. But if I were to open up the library, so you go over here to the library, you can see that we do have inside of here our nice curve, which we could kind of reuse. Could flip it around, do stuff like this. And if you ever want to look up your hotkeys for arranging things or transforming them, go over here to flip vertical, flip horizontal. Great ones to know. So if you ever see things magically flip around, that's probably what I'm doing. And okay, so I think we're off to a good start. Let's maybe a long one after 6 minutes. So we've done 2 lines, but let's again, this is already broken apart. So now let's kind of angle it down this way, give it something of a sharp drop to it, and then kind of put it down, do something like this, right? Okay, so what I'm gonna do is, again, try to keep the same width between the rails the whole time. And then for this outer one over here, I'm going to kind of send this to right about here and then put in another line. And this one I'm going to round out just a little bit. So I might even start with it rounded like that if I can. Zoom in a bit more. And then, again, snap is still on for me, so I want to make sure that that's snapped together. That's snapped over there. So I've got something like that. And if you want to do just the slightest little bit of rounding on this, you could always just kind of get rid of that little corner piece and put in another line. Do something like that. No, I think that does look pretty good. So in some sense, you're kind of just sketching out where your lines are going to be and then rounding them out after the fact. So again, we'll do the same thing there. And you can see that I, obviously on the outer one now, which is going to be kind of the greater arc, it's chopping off a bit more, and on this inner one, it's a little less. And snap is an important feature if I were to go to fill this in with a color. So the way these lines are treated is that if they're not perfectly together, you can't take the paint bucket and start to fill in there. But because mine were all snapped together, obviously I can do that, right? So let's undo that. It basically, it has to be a closed space inside of here. And you can get away with a little bit of some leeway here with these sub options. Don't close gaps, close small gaps, close large gaps. So I don't think that even at this close large gaps I could fill, let's see, yeah, I can't fill that in because these are just really large gaps. It would be kind of nice. Okay, so now that we've got that, let's get it all together. I'm gonna kind of look at it. I think maybe it could be a little bit smaller. I'm gonna just see if that's about right. Yeah, maybe about 90% decrease. So let's undo that. I'll show you guys the hotkey that I go to all the time is a scale and rotate. I just like numerically scaling things down. So if you want to set that up as your hotkey, you can always go over here to your keyboard shortcuts. For me, it's just Command R, boom, 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 get that down a little bit. And I think the ball could still coast within there. Let's grab this guy. I'm going to put him on a layer above the rail. All right, yep. And what you actually see for your ramp, at least in terms of the starter kit, is that doesn't necessarily have to be your actual boundaries for the ramp. And this would be even a hard one to kind of it's not one that you're really aiming to shoot in for. So for example, you might I don't know, actually if you had a a curve like this one over here, you could get the ball down and back around again. But this might just be like a kind of utility ramp, or maybe you drop the ball in something else and then it kind of magically comes back out and comes back down this way and down again. Or let me put it this a different way. So for example, say it was set up over here on this side, the plunger launches the ball out, and then it just naturally curves around the table, and then it's most likely going to go back down in here and then back around. It's kind of an easy setup for the beginning of the game, right? So, but again, I think worried more about just the artwork of it now. So let's not worry about the game design too much. I'm going to hit F8 on that. So I'll call this Rails. And do have it saved in the library now. One thing I do right away is bevel it. So go over here to bevel, and you'll notice it almost immediately becomes a little bit more realistic. You can see what's happening now, and it does kind of look more like real pipes inside of there. When you do that, I would also then go ahead and just copy this and paste it out, so you got now a duplicate of it. Oops, don't want to move the table. And let's arrange this one behind the other one. You can do this with your layers, or if you just want to keep these on the same layer, you can just send the one that you duplicated backwards. Okay, so you can now see it's behind there. And then let's go over here to tint. I'm going to set this to full black, and then little trick, if you tint it first and then go over here to advanced, it's going to maintain that the tinting that you already put in, and then you can just take the alpha down. So you'll notice now we're making a nice little shadow for it. There's a filter to create a drop shadow, but this gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of where you want to place it. And of course, you could even change the size or anything inside of the symbol itself. And I'm gonna make it a little bit darker. I think I'm gonna blur this out. So I'm gonna fold up color effect, just so you guys can, and this one too, just so you can see the other filter we put in here. Blur. I'll fold that up too, and I'll probably set this over here to high. Knock that up. And then you've got certainly a ramp that's looking a little bit better. Let's do this now. I'm going to go inside of, actually, let's work on a separate layer for right now. I was about to say, let's work inside of the symbol, but let's not do that just yet. So get your line tool again, and let's begin putting basically a connection between these two rails. So we're just going to do something like this, almost train track it, right? Let's zoom in a little bit though, so we can get a kind of a clearer handle on it. And we'll end up putting about the same filters on there. So I'm going to curve it just a little bit, and then as I go through here, kind of angle these down and then curve them a bit more. And now if I was going to do a very kind of complex, underbelly of this thing, this is I'd probably start the same way. I mean, what I'm thinking is I'm just only going to do these right now. But if I were to do, let's say 5 rods between each one of these ones, I'd still kind of sketch it out like this. And that way, you get the idea of kind of the angling of each one of these things before you commit. Otherwise, I think you'd be making all these little micro changes throughout. And at some point, you might want to just begin copying these down. And again, I'm just using that paste and place hotkey. All right, so for this one, let's begin to start angling it a little bit like so. And I think what we want is something a little bit more like this than like that. You see the difference? So it kind of feels more like the bucket part is leaning down this way. And maybe bring that in just a little bit. I'm going to just scale it up a little bit. It's actually not going to affect the width of it. It just, because it's a line, it really just ends up affecting the placement of the two endpoints when you do that. And I think we're now at a point where it's a little questionable what is happening. Is this is this way higher up and this one dips down, back toward the table, I guess is what I'm getting at. But therein is another reason to have your shadow a little bit different than the rail itself, as a unique instance, I should say. So, and we'll address that in a moment. But anyway, I think those are good. Let's now hit a F8 on these guys, and we'll call these bottom rail connectors. I don't know. Okay, nice little trick. Let's go and unlock our layer above, get the previous bevel filter that we had over here, and it's getting cut off, but there's a copy all filters option, so now you can go back over here to your connectors you just created, go over there to paste filters in, and this is going to look a little bit different than if I had taken this artwork and drawn it inside of here. It would have it wouldn't have given us this appearance right here, where you see that they're it would have made it look like they're all joined together instead of kind of like welded together as separate pieces, which is how they really would have been in real life. So I think that's much nicer looking. Our shadow, I believe, is above our little connectors, so let's fix that. I'm gonna just create another layer. I'll put that below there, and obviously too now our connectors should be a part of that shadow. So let's copy them, and I'm gonna then kind of lock everything but the shadow, so I can just easily find it. At least I thought I could easily find it. Oh, there it is. Okay. Some point, just double clicking will get me in there. I'm having trouble selecting it because there it is. Oh no, I guess sorry, I was mistaken. It is my bottom connectors they're still above my shadow. Yeah, I'm just confused. There we go. I don't know how that happened. Okay. There we go. Got the connectors selected. I'm just going to copy them. Double click inside of the shadow. There it is. And one thing, since let's make this a complete duplicate of the actual rails that we copied from. So take one step back, go back over here. As long as you still got it selected, go over here to modify, and then I'm going to go to symbol, duplicate symbol, and instead of this being rails, let's call this rail shadow, and then that way we can do anything we want inside of there. So double click it in. So for example, I could change the base color of it to black, so now it's kind of clear that this is going to be used as my shadow. And while I'm inside of here, I can paste in that symbol that I copied from for the connectors, and let's see, they're probably right about there, right? Just kind of comparing them. Okay, yeah, I think that's right. And then what I'm going to do is break these apart. So go over here to break apart. So now they're back now to being their raw vector artwork. Change the stroke color to black, so they just match this one. And now these are all on the same layer together. That's fine. If you wanted at this point to kind of increase the weight of the shadow a little bit, I don't think that's a bad idea. You could set this up to like 15, so it's obviously a bit chunkier and a bit more of a noticeable shadow once it gets blurred out. And then what we could consider doing is, so if you look at this, it kind of appears like the shadow is what making it so that the rail system is X amount off the ground, right? And the more that you kind of separate the two of them, so let's say I move this over, move both parts over here. You know what, let me just, there we go, select them by the layer. So the more this is, the two are offset, the more it seems like it's higher off the ground, right? And the opposite of that would be if I just had this kind of directly over top of the shadow, it doesn't seem like the rail system is now that far off the ground. But we can change this. We can change, if we change the source shadow, right, and we kind of move some of this stuff over to here, then it's going to seem like that part of the rail is dipping back down. And that's not the hardest thing in the world to do. A few ways to do it. You could just select a big chunk like this and make sure the free transform tool is selected, your Q hotkey, and you'll notice that if you begin kind of doing something like that, it pivots from the center, but you can grab that little white dot right there and make it pivot from a specific point, so you can see all that stays together. And then when we come back out over here, it definitely seems now like our rail system is dipping closer down to the ground. And I would even go and cut this off a little bit, like so. Now we don't want these parts to be that offset at all, right? So you got something like that, and then you could do the same thing over here at the top, and yet again hit Q, move the little pivot point around, and then just start tugging on it. So I'm just stretching it out a little bit. Right? Okay. Not looking too bad. I think if I'm just going to be a little nitpicky about it, I'd probably shave these a little bit. I think they're kind of extending out a bit too much. And I don't mind it if some of them are almost a little bit different. Like that one obviously is now cut off a little bit more than these other ones over here. It might give it even kind of a more realistic look to it. If there's something a little off about it, that's because it's maybe handmade, right? But yeah, I think that's a pretty good looking rail. Now that we kind of made the black stroke lines in there a little bit bigger, we could probably blur it out just a tad bit more. And by the way, the shadow does not need that bevel effect. Yep, I do like that. All right, so feel free to stop the video at any time. By the way, if you ever watch these videos through Google Chrome, there's an extension, which I didn't even know about extensions in Google Chrome, that extend the Vimeo player, which is what these, if you're watching this online, what these are probably coming through. And you can speed things up a little bit, so you could even make me talk faster if you wanted. I tend to go a little slow at the beginning of these drawing tutorials and then progressively speed up. So, yeah, I think we got it. And if you always want to have some fun, you could add in some more tracks, more connectors in the middle there. See if you end up with a train tracky like thing. And I'm just kind of toying with seeing what it looks like flipped over to the other side. Probably, I think if I were to use this ramp in a game, I would send the ball out the plunger, down this guy, and then over this way, because otherwise it's really hard to kind of shoot into this thing, and probably I wouldn't see you being able to make this curve happen with the ball going up into it. Maybe if the flipper was like directly below it, you could have that go on, but yeah. And again, I just want to remind you guys that you could have invisible rails essentially, and then or almost like hide them in the scene by putting them below the table. They'd still get recognized physics-wise. And then, your ramp actually just kind of becomes just a piece of artwork that makes it visually look like the ball is going down. But, what you actually drew is not what the ball's actually interacting with. Because this is kind of a tight, a tight space. But again, if the ball was coming up out here and then just has to basically go into there, it would, as long as there's enough of room, and it does look like there is. But so again, your real rails could be almost totally invisible lines that do something like, they don't even have to be as pretty, they could just do something like this. There's no reason why you shouldn't round them out, but they could do like that, right? And then again, if you are using my pinball starter kit, Xcode has to for it to recognize the alpha data of something, to make an alpha mask for the physics body of it, it needs it to be at 10%. So you'd have to put down the alpha to at least 10%, like that, which makes it so that you can still see it, right, if it was above everything. But again, you could just hide it below the entire table. So for example, it would be essentially like just dragging this down there below the wood texture, right? So you'd see the physics body of it if you turn physics on. They're showing that, but otherwise be completely hidden in the game itself. Okay, all right, let's move on to the next video.